make sure it's going, and then I'm gonna start the music, and then we're gonna go. Welcome back to the Backwards History Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Will, here with my co-host, Kevin. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Shut up, Kevin.
I would give you a particular hand gesture, but you can't actually see me right now.
I'd break it off. Well, folks, if you didn't guess from that, we're going to be talking about the history and the misinformation around the history of the middle finger. Well, before we get into that, I want to let y'all know that we've got a Facebook page, we've got an Instagram, we've got a Twitter, and you can go like us, share us, subscribe to us, and go over to iTunes and make sure you give us a rating and a review. And don't forget to go check out Mike Ramsey Music for the intro and outro. But yes, this episode was actually brought about by a little bit of listener interaction. Thanks to Adam, I'm going to leave his last name off, for interacting with us on a Facebook post. Actually, the most popular one we've had on the business page since we moved to it, of George Washington flipping the bird.
It has been our most popular one by far.
And we got to a conversation in the comment section, and here we are. So if you've got anything you'd want us to talk about, or you just want to talk about, just go onto our Facebook page or our Twitter or wherever and just start a conversation with us. You could be the next person that gives us an idea for another episode, and we'll shout you out too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we want. We want interaction with you guys. You're more than welcome. And don't forget, we also have an email address. It's backwardshistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can send whatever you want to it. Just yeah. But I'm going to hand this off to Kevin to get us started on the history of the universal "I'm number one" sign.
I'm number one. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Will. Now, the middle finger is known by several different names. I personally prefer the bird, which,
the bird is the word.
So I start that now. I always wonder, why is it called the bird? Well, thanks again, Adam, for bringing this topic to us. It fits our criteria very well. And this was, like William said, it was just a listener who just had a curiosity about history and reached out to us. So thank you again. This is one of the things in history that, surprise, surprise, you don't have a lot of written documents about. We don't have any book or anything somewhere that says, oh, well, on this day, so-and-so decided this particular gesture meant this, and here we are. History isn't always that neat and clean sometimes, I'm afraid. But this one is there's a story associated with it that is still widely believed to be true, but in fact is not. To give you an idea of how old it is, it actually goes back to Greek times, and where the symbol meant very similar back then what it does today.
And by symbol, he means the hand gesture, not the artist formerly known as Prince.
Thank you for the clarification on that.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I want to give y'all the Latin saying because it sounds like a Harry Potter spell. It goes Digitus Impeducus.
That definitely sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
Straight up Harry Potter. Pardon my terrible Latin if I mispronounce any of that. Just a good old Southern boy most times. But it literally translates to unchaste finger, which refers to a sexual element. We'll leave it at that. Now, the story that most people think is true is actually a really good story, which I think is why it has staying power, why it's been passed down for generations and generations. The story begins It goes back to the Battle of Agincourt, October 25th, 1415. Now, this is during the Hundred Years' War, which ran from 1337 to 1453. And if your math's any good, you quickly realize that that's not 100 years. That's 116.
I went to Mississippi State University.
Ditto.
My math is terrible.
Ditto. Um, that's one of the things historians years later realize, wait a minute, I think I forgot to carry the one or something. Anyway, the Hundred Years' War is just a series of ongoing conflicts between England and France during the time. Can you imagine just a prolonged warfare, just back and forth for a century?
I don't know. The United States is well on its way in the Middle East.
Yeah,
Hiyo.
got several decades on that one, don't we? Yeah.
Anyway,
Like I said, some things never change. Anyway, during the Battle of Agincourt, you have the English. They've invaded France, and there's a lot of reasons as to why they invaded. The simplest one is they wanted to take some stuff, mostly land. So the story goes the English have what's known as the English longbow, which is a very powerful, very accurate bow, but it also has really good distance. So the further you can stand away from somebody and hit them with something, typically the better you do in a fight. You don't have to get really close. The story goes that when the French would capture archers from the English side, they would cut off their middle finger because it was needed in order to pull the bow. And so a long bow is about as tall as an average man, about 5 feet or so. Um, Folks back then were a little bit shorter than we are now. Poor
hey,
nutrition.
I'm still that height.
Anyway, the story goes they capture them, cut off their finger. So in defiance, the English, anytime they would see French soldiers, stick up their middle finger, it's like, hey, still ain't got me. Now the reason they call it flipping the bird is the feathers on the arrows that the English were using, bird feathers, right? So Sean, hey, I still got my middle finger. I can still, pluck this bow. You know what I'm saying? And
I
they
can
would
send that bird.
send that bird. Now, the English longbow is typically made out of wood from the yew tree, yew. So the story goes, it's plucking yew because you're, plucking the string. Which, if sounds very similar to a very derogatory statement.
One that
Anyway,
we will refrain from using.
very much so refrain. That's a really good story. It has a lot of great elements. It's, you know, fighting going on, defiance against authority, all this and that. By the way, English end up winning the Battle of Agincourt. Spoiler alert on that one. Uh, None of
But
it's
the
true.
problem with that story, yeah, it's wrong. It is
It is.
absolutely wrong, and we both fell into that trap. We
Oh
even
yeah.
told the that particular group chat or that comment section, that comment thread, that story, and then we realized we were wrong, and we
Very
will
wrong.
admit it. We were very wrong.
But now the reason we were wrong, and a lot of that falls on my part, because Will did reach out to me about clarification and all that. I've actually watched historical documentaries that tell this very same story, a very similar story. Um, Here are some reasons why the story doesn't make sense. Typically, archers don't get captured because they're usually far away. You know? Capturing soldiers, they're no use to you if they're dead, and then mutilating them, that doesn't really do you a lot of good. Cutting off one finger because you can still fight. You can still wield a sword or a spear, or, whatever have you.
But typically,
Mhm.
captured soldiers would be ransomed back to the army they were captured from. And then they would be redeployed with that military. If you cut what the person needs off to be able to do their particular duty or job,
Mhm.
then they're no longer valuable.
Right.
So no one's going to pay for a bowman who can no longer use his bow. So it would be completely counterproductive.
And the other thing is, if you capture soldiers, you usually end up just being executed. I mean, you're not gonna hold on to soldiers unless in the instance of ransoming, because many knights come from noble families. They have families that have money. So hey, dude, we got your son so and so. We want this much money. Send it on. We'll send your boy home to you, kind of deal.
Yeah, bowman
Um,
would be way far down on the social scale as opposed to a knight.
exactly. So bowmen don't carry a lot of value. So there's really no point in keeping them alive if you happen to capture them. Which, by the way, is very difficult to capture archers because they're usually the furthest away from the battle in regards to actual soldiers.
Actual
But look,
placement of them
right,
within the army and the methods that they would use. So
right. And so that story just, while it sounds great, it's you got all the right parts. If you start to break it down, you realize, hey, it's just a really good story someone put together. You take a well-known historic event, take a internationally recognized hand gesture, and you start giving it this origin story of defiance, and it all comes together quite nicely. Unfortunately, it fits together a little too well. But if you pull on one string, it all starts to unravel.
and then I heard the story. Yeah, I read
Mhm.
about like Romans would flip the bird as like a gesture of going up a no zone on a
Right.
man of trying to be
Exactly.
PG. And then another culture used it as a symbol of it was a phallic symbol.
Right.
I'm
Right.
trying my
Exactly.
best to find a way to say all of this very PG.
Good job so
Um,
far.
but yeah, it's absolutely wrong. It's great story. Us as Westerners and more directly us as Americans, we love stories of defiance. And I mean, if you drive it any day in 5 o'clock traffic, we love the I'm number one symbol. Oh,
Yeah, like you said, we do have that rebellious spirit, I guess. All the way back to our founding. The thing about this story that I find the most interesting, or the actual origin story, is no matter which culture you look at that utilizes it, it means almost exactly the same thing. Just
well,
you know, uh,
then there's other cultures that use very similar hand gestures to mean
right,
the same thing, but they're not. Like I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe certain Asian cultures will flip their pinky in the same meaning,
right.
completely different gesture.
And that's the thing about humans. While we do have language, the spoken word, we very much so speak with our body language, especially hand gestures. One of the countries where people are very expressive with their body language in the hands is Italy. I've watched several documentaries and talked to people about it, and it's they do it and they don't really realize they're doing it, kind of thing, because it's so commonplace. You see all over the world, while we have the ability to speak verbally, I always say, "Well, read their body language. What's that telling you?" And because it is very much a subconscious action we're doing when we're communicating. The body can tell you a whole lot of things, but the fact that you look all over the world in all these different times and these different groups, and they all have the same, roughly the same meaning. Even in if you read Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare, it all starts when the dude says, "I bite my thumb at thee." He basically insulting this guy in front of everybody. Like, oh, what's he gonna do now? You just get called out in front of the whole town, kind of deal. But just that one gesture, that one act, sparks this very tragic story. But you see, it even makes its way into literature. I was talking to someone today. We were listening to music on the radio, and Kid Rock came on, and I remember having that one CD where he's, giving the one finger salute on the actual CD. It's ingrained in us way back it's in our pop culture. It's universally understood. You don't really have to accompany it with words, but many people do.
Right.
But this was a really fun topic to research, and I like how we had a listener who, you know, interacted with us, which I really want to do more moving forward. So please hit us up on social media platforms, shoot us an email, let us know, give us feedback. We don't have thin skin. No such thing as negative feedback.
We warned y'all on the first episode that we reserve the right to offend anybody.
Did
We definitely are not thin skinned on the other end of that. If you want to argue with us, you want to whatever. If you have your own podcast and you want to be a guest, if you don't have your own podcast and you want to be a guest, hit us up. We'll talk about it. We'll see what we can do. Um, but yeah, you know, as always, we're just two guys, usually with one microphone. But thanks to the quarantine, we're two guys in two different locations with two different microphones. We don't want you to take our words as fact. We don't want you to take us as experts at all. We want you to do your own research. We want you to form your own opinions. Trust, but verify.